Minasan konnichiwa. Last week, we learned how every Japanese sentence has the same core. The main carriage and the engine, A and B. The thing we are talking about and the thing we are saying about it. And I told you that we can have a lot more carriages as sentences become more complex, but they still always have the same core. Now we're going to look at some of those extra carriages, and the first one we're going to look at is a very mysterious carriage, but it's also a very, very, very important one. Part of the reason that so many people find Japanese confusing, vague, and difficult is because they are never properly taught about this carriage. What does it look like? Well, I told you before that while every sentence has the same two core elements, you can't always see both of them. You can always see the engine, but sometimes you can't see the main carriage. Why not? When you can't see it, it's because of this. This is the invisible carriage. And while you can't see it, it's always there. And understanding that it's always there is the key to understanding Japanese. So, what is an invisible carriage? In English, the closest equivalent is it. So, let's begin by seeing what it does in English. Let's take this sentence. The ball rolled down the hill. When the ball got to the bottom, the ball hit a sharp stone, the ball was punctured, and all the air came out of the ball. Now, would anybody ever say that? Of course they wouldn't, because once we've established what we're talking about, we replace it with it. So we say, the ball rolled down the hill. When it got to the bottom, it hit a sharp stone, it was punctured, and all the air came out of it. Now, let's suppose a small child tries to say this and says, ball rolled down hill, got to bottom, hit sharp stone, got punctured, all the air came out. Now, is that difficult to understand? No, it isn't difficult at all, is it? Because in fact, we don't need to use this it marker every time, over and over again. English grammar demands it, but there's no actual communicative need to do it, and Japanese doesn't do it. In place of it, which actually means nothing because it can mean anything, if I say it, I may be talking about a flower or about the sky. I may be talking about a tree, or my finger, or the Eiffel Tower, or the Andromeda Galaxy. It in itself doesn't mean anything. We know what it is from context. So, if a small child, or even an adult, comes down to the kitchen at night and someone sees her, she might say, got really hungry, came for something to eat. Again, there's nothing confusing or difficult about this. She means, I got really hungry, I came down for something to eat. In English, this isn't a proper sentence, but in Japanese, it is. All those little pronouns, like it, she, he, I, they, in Japanese, can be replaced by the invisible carriage, the zero pronoun. But the important thing to remember is that they are still there. Alright, so let's look at this at work in Japanese. I might say, Dolly-da, and that means, I am Dolly. So the full sentence is, zero ga Dolly da. So this looks as if it only has an engine and no main carriage, but the main carriage is simply the invisible one. And we can say that I is the default value of the zero pronoun, the invisible carriage. However, the context can define it as anything. For example, if we hear a rustling in the woods and look over in the direction of it, and I say, usagi da, that means, zero ga usagi da, it is a rabbit. It, that thing that we just looked towards, rustling in the trees, that's a rabbit. If I say, doyobi da, doyobi means Saturday, I'm saying it is Saturday. What's it? Today. Today is Saturday. It is Saturday. All these sentences are full, complete Japanese sentences with the ga marked subject, the A carriage, the main carriage, and the engine. But in each of these cases, the main carriage is invisible, but it's still there. Now it may seem a little bit like splitting hairs to insist that it isn't being left out. It actually is there. But it's important to understand this. It's important at this stage, but it will become much more important as sentences become more complex. Without this piece of information, they're going to start sounding extremely vague and hard to grasp. So now, let's start looking step by step at how sentences can become more complex. And then let's see how it all fits together at this stage. I'm going to introduce you to one more kind of carriage, and that is an O car. This means a noun marked by the particle o, which is sometimes said o, and more usually just o. And if you know the English grammatical term object, which means the thing we're doing something to, it's a good mnemonic to remember that O stands for object. So the O car looks like this, and as you see, it's white. It's white because it's not part of the core train. The core train always consists of just two elements, the engine and the main carriage. When we see white cars, we know that they're telling us something more about the engine or about the main carriage. So let's take a sentence here. 私がケーキを食べる. This means I eat cake. Now the core sentence here is I eat. Those are the two black carriages. The white carriage, ケーキを, is telling us more about the engine. The core sentence is I eat, and ケーキを is telling us what it is that I eat. Now, the interesting thing here is that we may often see this said like this, ケーキを食べる. And I think you already know what's going on when this happens. This is another case where we have the invisible a car. We can't have a sentence without a ga. We can't have an action being done without a doer. If we say ケーキを食べる, what we're really saying is ゼロがケーキを食べる. And the default value for 0, for the invisible carriage, is watashi. So usually this is going to be I eat cake. Although if we were talking about someone else at the time, it might mean that that person eats cake. Alright, so this is quite a lot of information to process at one time. And once again, if you would like to make some sentences using wo and using the invisible carriage, and if you do that, I'd like you to write it in 3 forms. That's to say, the Japanese would be keiki wo taberu. The full form of the Japanese, including the zero pronoun, the invisible carriage, would be zero ga keiki wo taberu, and the English would be I eat cake. So if you'd like to practice any of these sentences and write them in the comments below, once again, I will correct them while this channel remains small and I'm able to do so. If you'd like to learn about the structure of Japanese words and kanji, as well as Japanese sentences, may I recommend my book, Alice in Kanji Land. You'll find details of that in the information below. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. Thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします. Class dismissed.